I have to be completely honest with you. I was uh, I was stuck in traffic this morning. Total, absolute gridlock on the highway.
Oh, yeah. The worst way to start a day.
Exactly. And I could feel my blood pressure doing that thing, just spiking. I'm gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles are literally white.
Right.
And I'm sitting there running through the meeting I'm already late for in my head. I'm
Yeah.
inventing arguments with my boss that haven't even happened yet. And I'm basically unraveling in the driver's seat.
Mm.
And then I looked over at the guy in the car right next to me.
Let me guess. He looked totally zen.
He was singing. Full volume, drumming on his dashboard. He looked like he was having the absolute time of his life. And it struck me because we are in the exact same traffic, dealing with the exact same delay, but experiencing a completely different reality.
That's a perfect encapsulation of what we're getting into today.
Right. It made me think about the documents you sent over for today's deep dive.
Yeah.
Because I think we usually assume elite performance is about being the smartest person in the room or the strongest athlete on the field. But sitting there, I realized maybe it's just about being the guy who doesn't lose his mind in traffic.
You've actually hit the nail right on the head there. We tend to totally glamorize the what of performance.
Yeah.
The gold medal, the massive IPO, the high-stakes Navy SEAL raid. We love the shiny outcome. But the actual mechanism of getting there usually comes down to something much quieter.
And that quiet mechanism is exactly what we are decoding today.
Yeah.
We are looking at the source material from Learned Excellence, a book by Eric Potterat, Alan Eagle.
Hmm.
And honestly, I was looking over Potterat's resume before we started, and it's pretty intimidating.
It's ridiculous is what it is. It really
I had to double check it just to make sure I was reading it right. So this guy was the head psychologist for the U.S. Navy SEALs. He was intimately involved in the selection process for BUDS.
Which, for those who don't know, BUDS is Basic Underwater Demolition SEAL Training. It is arguably the most grueling, punishing military training program on planet Earth.
Exactly. And if that wasn't enough, he then goes to the Los Angeles Dodgers as their director of specialized performance, helping them win a World Series. Then he works with Red Bull athletes, people who literally risk their lives for fun, jumping off cliffs and flying planes. And, he also works with the NASA astronauts.
Right, he's basically the prevent panic guy for the highest stakes jobs on the planet. He has seen human beings operating under the absolute most extreme pressure imaginable.
Which brings us to the mission of our deep dive today. We want to take Potterat's insights from working with these elite performers and apply them to, us, to you listening right now. Because his core thesis, and this is what we're going to spend this time unpacking, is that excellence isn't an innate gift. It's a learned discipline.
And to get there, he argues we have to completely change how we view performance. We are completely obsessed with our hardware when we should be obsessed with our software.
Okay, I want to stop you right there and break that down immediately. Because when
Okay.
you say hardware, my brain instantly goes to tech. I'm thinking about my laptop sitting right here.
Yeah.
But he's using it as an analogy for human biology and skills,
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Think of it this way. Picture the smartphone sitting in your pocket right now. It is a total miracle of engineering. It has a lightning-fast processor, a high-resolution camera, terabytes of memory. That physical machine is the hardware.
Right, the physical specs.
Yes. Now, translate that to a human being. Your hardware is your IQ. It's your physical height, your fast-twitch muscle fibers, your college degree. It's the technical skills you've learned, the raw machinery you bring to the table every single day.
Okay, I track that. So if I'm training for a marathon, I'm doing hardware work. If I'm studying for the bar exam and memorizing case law, that's hardware work. Learning a new coding language is hardware work.
Precisely. And if you think about it, we spend the first 20 or 30 years of our lives doing almost exclusively hardware work. We go to school, we hit the gym, we get certifications, we practice our swing. We all want to build this shiny, high-spec, incredibly expensive machine.
Which makes sense. You need good hardware to compete.
You do! But here's the critical question. What happens if you take that brand new $1,000 flagship smartphone and you try to run an operating system from 1995 on it?
Oh, it crashes immediately. It freezes up. It's totally useless.
It's a brick. And Potterat's ultimate point here is that most of us are walking around with Ferrari-level hardware. We are smart. We are highly capable. We are well-educated. But we are running Windows 95 software.
So what exactly is the software in this analogy?
The software is your mental operating system. It is how you handle stress. It's your resilience, your focus, your ability to regulate your emotions when things go wrong. And the genuinely scary part about this, most of us have never spent a single hour of our lives intentionally updating that software.
That's actually kind of terrifying when you put it like that, because you see this play out in real life all the time. You see the brilliant Ivy League educated executive who completely falls apart and starts yelling during a PR crisis, or the college student who knows all the material perfectly but just blanks during the final exam.
Exactly. That right there. That is a software crash. When the extreme pressure hits, the hardware doesn't matter anymore. A Navy SEAL candidate doesn't usually fail BUDS because he physically can't do enough push-ups. By the time they get there, the hardware is fine. Most of the guys who ring the bell and quit are completely physically capable of finishing the drills.
So why do they quit?
They fail because they panic. They fail because their software glitches under the intense load. They get overwhelmed by the freezing cold water or the exhaustion or the fear of the next evolution, and their operating system literally shuts down the machine.
So is the premise of the source material that we can actually install and update. Because I'll be honest, I look at someone like a fighter pilot or a trauma surgeon, and my default thought is they're just built different. They were born with ice in their veins.
That is the great myth, and it's something Potterat attacks head on. We love to think calmness under pressure is a genetic trait because, let's face it, it lets us off the hook. If they are just born with it, then I don't have to put in the work to try and achieve it.
Right, it's a convenient excuse.
Very convenient. But Potterat is completely adamant about this. Excellence is learned. Mental toughness is not a personality trait like having blue eyes or being 6 feet tall. It is a specific skill set. It is exactly like learning to speak Spanish or learning to play the piano. You can rewrite your own code. Even the elite guys feel the fear. They just have protocols to manage it.
I really love that approach because it takes the whole mystery out of it. It's not magic, it's just mechanics. But if the mental software is the key to everything, where do we even begin?
Yeah.
What is the first line of code we have to write to start this upgrade?
It starts at the absolute foundation, values and goals. But specifically, it starts with a concept that I think trips up almost everyone, whether they realize it or not. The deep conflict between identity and reputation.
See, I feel like most people, myself included, would use those words completely interchangeably. Like, my reputation is who I am. If people think I'm a hard worker, I am a hard worker. If people think I'm successful, then I'm successful.
And that right there is the trap. That is exactly where the software gets buggy from day one. Reputation is entirely extrinsic. It is the question of what do they think of me? It's your follower count on social media, your job title, the applause from the crowd, your annual performance review.
All things controlled by other people.
Exactly. Identity, on the other hand, is completely intrinsic. It is the question of who am I when absolutely nobody is watching. And to really explain why this distinction is literally life or death, we have to talk about the case study of David Kulturi from the book.
Man, the cliff diver. I remember reading this section of the source material, and my palms were actually sweating just looking at the text on the page.
It is incredibly visceral reading. I mean, think about it. Have you ever stood on an eye dive at a local public pool? That's what, maybe 10 feet in the air?
Yeah, and it feels like 100 feet when you look down at the water. My knees shake just doing that.
Right. Well, David Kulturi jumps from 90 feet. That is the equivalent of an 8-story building. When you drop from that height, you are hitting the water at roughly 55 miles per hour.
That is just insane.
It is. The impact is so violently forceful that cliff divers have to enter the water feet first every single time, because if they were to hit head first at 55 miles per hour, the resulting concussion could literally kill them on impact. They also have to clench every muscle in their body at the exact microsecond of impact. Otherwise, the surface tension can rip their joints apart or break bones.
Which begs the obvious question, why would anyone voluntarily do this? What is the drive to put yourself through that?
That is the million-dollar question. And for a very long time in his career, Kulturi was doing it because he was, quote, David the Diver. His entire sense of self-worth was deeply wrapped up in the Red Bull sponsorships, the cheering fans, the reputation of being this fearless, crazy gladiator of the air.
So he was fueled entirely by reputation.
Yes. But that kind of fuel burns incredibly dirty. Because of it, he was riddled with internal anxiety. He was terrified, not just of the physical danger of the jump, but terrified of looking like a failure in front of his audience. What if he didn't podium? What if he looked scared?
He was playing not to lose rather than playing to win.
Exactly. When you are driven by reputation, you are constantly, exhaustingly scanning the audience for any sign of disapproval. It consumes massive amounts of your brain's processing power. And then he went to Switzerland for a highly specialized stunt jump.
Right, this is where it goes bad. He was jumping from a platform suspended underneath a moving paraglider, wasn't he?
Yes. which already sounds like a catastrophically bad idea. It adds a massive layer of chaos to an already chaotic sport. The platform is moving unpredictably, the wind is swirling in the mountains. He takes the leap, and almost immediately, he knows his alignment is off.
He knows this while he's still in the air.
Midair, he over-rotates. He knows with absolute certainty he's going to crash. He hits the water awkwardly, and at 50 miles per hour, water isn't soft and splashy. It acts like solid concrete. He ended up lacerating his spleen on impact.
Oof. That is a tremendously serious internal injury.
It is entirely life-threatening. So he's being rushed to the ICU, he's dealing with internal bleeding, the whole 9 yards, and he's lying there in this hospital bed in a foreign country, tubes coming out of his arms, facing the real possibility that his career is completely over. And in that quiet, terrifying moment, he has a profound realization.
He realized that if he couldn't physically dive anymore, he had no idea who he was.
Bingo. Because his hardware, his physical body was broken. So if his entire identity was tied exclusively to that hardware and the reputation of being the Red Bull Cliff guy, he was completely empty. He didn't exist anymore.
That's a heavy place to be.
It forced him to rebuild his mental software entirely from scratch. He had to shift his internal narrative from, I am a cliff diver, to I am a curious, adventurous human being who happens to dive. It might sound like a subtle semantic difference, but it is a seismic psychological shift.
So when he finally recovered, did that change how he performed?
Completely. When he eventually went back up to the 90-foot platform, which by the way takes insane amounts of courage after a near-death crash, he wasn't jumping for the Instagram likes or the sponsorship dollars anymore. He was jumping because he intrinsically loved the pure feeling of flight. He moved from reputation to identity, and it allowed him to perform with total freedom rather than gripping fear.
Okay, I hear that, and it's an incredible story. But how do we actually do that? Because I'm obviously not a professional cliff diver. But I definitely catch myself worrying about what my boss thinks of my presentation or what my neighbors think of my car. How do you and I make that switch from reputation to identity without having to nearly die in a Swiss lake first?
That is where Potterat introduces a very specific tactical tool. He suggests developing a personal credo. And I know how that sounds. It sounds like a cheesy exercise at a mandatory corporate retreat.
It really does.
Yeah.
I can instantly picture the forced trust falls and the lukewarm urn of hotel coffee. All right, everyone, let's break into groups and write our mission statements.
Right. Bear with me, though, because Potterat approaches this like a high-performance tactical tool, not a fluffy vision board. He forces his clients, whether they are Tier 1 SEALs or Fortune 500 CEOs, to physically write down their core values, the foundational stuff that actually drives them as humans. And then, here's the hard part, you have to cull that list down to exactly 10 words. Total.
10 words. That's it. That seems almost impossible to encapsulate an entire life philosophy into 10 words.
It's extremely difficult, but there is a neurological reason for the strict limit. In a crisis moment, when your heart rate is at 160 beats per minute, you cannot remember a 3-page PDF manifesto. You need a short, punchy mantra. You need something you can instantly access when your brain feels like it's on fire.
Do we know what Potterat's own 10 words are?
Yeah, his own personal credo includes phrases like wonder, stay hungry, stay humble, loyalty, and my personal favorite, be a good ancestor.
Oh, wow. Be a good ancestor. I really like that one. It immediately shifts your perspective away from whatever petty annoyance is happening right now and forces you to look at the long-term legacy.
Exactly. It fundamentally changes your decision-making process in the moment. Let's say you walk into a highly contentious, high-pressure business negotiation. If you're running on the old software, you're thinking, I really hope these guys think I'm smart and tough. That's reputation.
And it makes you anxious.
Right. But with the new software, you fall back on your credo. You ask yourself, am I staying hungry here? Am I being loyal to my team's core needs? That is identity. It firmly grounds you. You cannot control what the people across the table think of you, but you possess 100% control over whether you are living up to your own credo. It acts as an unbreakable anchor in the storm.
But once you have that anchor securely in place, you still need to actually move the ship forward. Right. You need a destination. You need goals. And the source material dives deep into goal setting with what they call the 6 pillars. And I have to admit, reading this section made me feel a little bit guilty about my own life.
Really? Why is that?
Because, like a lot of ambitious people, I probably focus all my energy on just 1 or 2 pillars. Like, career is huge, and maybe family gets whatever's left over. But Potterat explicitly lists 6 distinct pillars we need to build goals around: career, relationships, health, spirituality, hobbies, and legacy. He uses this great metaphor of a house to explain it.
It is the absolute best way to visualize balance. Imagine your entire life is a large house, and it is held up by support pillars. If you are a high performer, like a lot of the people listening to this deep dive probably are, you likely have a massive reinforced titanium-clad pillar for your career. You pour 14 hours a day into making sure that pillar is indestructible.
Yep, guilty as charged.
But meanwhile, your health pillar is made out of toothpicks. Your relationships pillar is actively crumbling because you never see your friends. Your hobbies pillar doesn't even exist.
Right, who has time for hobbies?
Exactly the mindset. So what happens when an earthquake hits? What happens when you inevitably get fired, or your company goes under, or the market completely crashes? If your entire house is built on that single career pillar and that pillar takes a direct hit, the whole structure comes crashing down. You experience a total catastrophic collapse of self.
Because your identity was entirely housed in that one pillar.
Yes. But if you have actively cultivated all 6 pillars and your career pillar takes a massive hit, the house still stands. It might shake, but it doesn't fall. You can lean heavily on your physical health. You can lean on your deep spiritual practice. You can rely on your strong network of relationships to hold you up while you repair the career damage.
It's basic diversification. We would never put our entire retirement portfolio into one single volatile stock.
Yeah.
But we do it with our actual lives every day.
That is a phenomenal analogy. Yes. And within those 6 pillars, you have to be very careful about the type of goals you're setting. This is another major area where amateurs get it completely backward. Amateurs set outcome goals. Things like, I want to win the gold medal, or I want to be promoted to CEO by next year.
What's inherently wrong with that? Isn't having a big, audacious target the definition of ambition?
It's ambition, sure, but it's incredibly fragile ambition. Because at the end of the day, you do not control the outcome. You do not control the Olympic judges scoring your routine. You don't control the macroeconomic environment. You don't control what your competitors do. If you rigidly tie your personal happiness and success to winning the gold medal, you are essentially handing the keys to your mental well-being over to a total stranger.
So what is the alternative?
Potterat says elite performers set process goals.
Give me the clear distinction between the two.
An outcome goal is, I am going to lose 20 pounds by summer. A process goal is, I will spend 2 hours meal prepping every Sunday afternoon, and I will go to the gym for 45 minutes 4 times a week.
Ah, I see. Because you control the meal prep and the gym attendance completely.
100%. Nobody can stop you from meal prepping. And the beautiful irony of this software upgrade is that if you obsessively focus purely on the process, the outcome almost always takes care of itself. But if you obsess over the outcome, you usually get flooded with anxiety, you freeze up, and you end up completely screwing up the process.
Which leads us perfectly into the third section of our deep dive today, which is mindset.
Yeah.
The actual operating system running in the background. Because you can have the credo and you can map out the 6 pillars, but if your head isn't right in the moment, you aren't going anywhere. And Potterat has this specific phrase in the book, mindset is a choice.
Yes, a very deliberate choice.
Which, I'll be honest, when I first read that, it sounded a tiny bit like toxic positivity. Like one of those bumper stickers that says, just choose to be happy. Is it really that brutally simple?
No, it's not about just vaguely choosing to be happy. It's about consciously choosing the correct mental tool for the specific job at hand. He explicitly defines mindset as how one sets their mind to face a given situation. Most of us are wandering around with a default mindset.
A default mindset. What does that look like in practice?
It means we are purely reactive. We wake up, we roll over, we check our phone, we see a terrifying news headline about the economy, we go to the kitchen, we accidentally spill our coffee on our shirt, and boom, our software automatically boots up into a defensive or anxious mindset for the rest of the day. We are letting the random chaos of the world dictate our internal state.
We are letting the traffic dictate our mood, like my morning today.
Exactly. Elite performers, however, utilize a chosen mindset. They actively frame the narrative before the situation can frame it for them. But here is the really crucial nuance that most self-help books miss. They do not just have one single invincible mindset. They have multiple distinct mindsets for different roles in their lives.
The book talks about this using the contrast between the SEAL sniper and the toddler dad. Right?
Yes, and this is such a critical distinction for anyone trying to balance high-level work with a personal life. A Tier 1 SEAL sniper needs a highly specific mental framework to do his job. He needs to be hyper-vigilant, completely stripped of emotional interference, lethal, and operating with absolutely zero margin for error. That specific mindset is what keeps him and his team alive in a combat zone like Ramadi.
Makes total sense.
But imagine what happens if he brings that exact same hypervigilant, zero margin for error mindset home to his house, and his 3-year-old daughter accidentally spills a glass of milk on the rug.
That would be a complete disaster. You cannot treat a 3-year-old making a mistake like a life-or-death combat scenario.
You would traumatize the kid and probably ruin your marriage. Potterat makes the analogy that you wouldn't wear heavy plastic ski boots to play a game of pickup basketball. It's the wrong gear for the environment. Yet professionals do this mentally all the time. We try to wear our hardened work armor at the family dinner table.
We don't take the boots off.
Right. The truly elite performer knows exactly how to consciously switch gears. They have a physical or mental ritual where they actively say, okay, I am pulling into my driveway now. I am officially taking off the aggressive CEO hat. I am putting on the patient dad hat. My primary metric for success right now is connection and empathy, not ruthless efficiency.
That level of compartmentalization seems almost like a superpower. But let's say you are actively in the high-pressure role. You've got the CEO hat on, you're in the big presentation, and things start going horribly wrong. How do you keep your chosen mindset from totally cracking under the pressure? The source material talks heavily about the circle of control.
This is the absolute core mantra of sports psychology. If you talk to any elite, world-class athlete, they will repeat this to you. Control the controllables. I want you to literally picture a circle drawn on a whiteboard. Inside that circle, there are only 3 things. Just 3.
Only 3 things in the entire world we control.
Only 3. Number 1, attitude. How you consciously choose to think about and frame the situation you are in. Number 2, effort. How hard you physically or mentally try. And number 3, behavior. What specific actions you actually take. Attitude, effort, behavior. That is it.
Okay, so what about the weather during an outdoor event?
Entirely outside the circle.
What about a referee making a blatantly terrible call against your team?
Outside the circle.
What about the broader economy crashing right as you launch a product?
Outside the circle. And here is the brutal truth of the software upgrade. The exact microsecond you spend mental energy getting intensely angry at the referee or the weather, you are wasting precious processing power. You are rapidly draining your phone's battery on acts that aren't actually doing anything useful. You are leaking performance energy.
But that is so hard to do in the moment. If a ref makes a bad call, it feels so deeply unjust. You instinctively want to scream and throw your hands up.
Of course you do. It's human nature to want fairness. But ask yourself objectively. Does screaming at the referee ever actually change the call? No, never. All it does is massively spike your cortisol levels and completely ruin your focus for the very next play. The elite athlete acknowledges the bad call, internally says, well, that sucks, and then immediately, ruthlessly pivots their focus back inside the circle. What is my very next behavior?
The story of figure skater Nathan Chen from the book is the absolute perfect case study for this, isn't it? We have to tell the story.
It is the ultimate circle of control redemption arc. So let's rewind to the 2018 Winter Olympics. Nathan Chen is the undeniable favorite. He is universally known as the Quad King. The media hype surrounding him is just unbelievable. He steps out onto the ice for his short program. The whole world is watching, and he just crumbled.
He fell multiple times,
He
wrong.
fell, he stumbled, he ended up finishing 17th in that segment.
17th place is devastating when you are mathematically expected to win the gold medal. It's a very public humiliation on the biggest stage possible.
It completely crushed him. But fast forward 4 years to the 2022 Olympics in Beijing. In the interim, he actively worked with Potterat to rewrite his software. And what they diagnosed was that in 2018, Chen's entire mindset was hyper-focused on the outcome. He was obsessing over winning the gold medal, which, as we established, is outside the circle of control. He was completely consumed by his reputation.
So what did he physically change for 2022? How do you fix that?
He radically shifted his process goal. His new primary focus for the Olympics was fun.
Fun. I mean, that sounds kind of underwhelming for the Olympics.
It sounds incredibly soft to an amateur, right?
Yeah.
But it was a highly calculated strategic choice. He realized that the immense pressure had stolen his joy. He had completely forgotten why he even loved to skate in the first place. So in Beijing, he brought his acoustic guitar with him into the Olympic Village. He played music in his room to relax. He actively forced himself to physically smile while he was out on the ice. He relentlessly focused on his identity as someone who simply loves the art of skating, rather than his reputation as the Quad King.
And he won gold.
He completely dominated the competition. And the vital lesson there isn't some cliche like just have fun and you'll magically win. The deeper lesson is that focusing on fun was his specific mechanical tool for staying strictly inside the circle of control. When he focused on simply enjoying the feeling of his skates on the ice, his body relaxed. And when his body relaxed, his world-class hardware, the thousands of hours of muscle memory, could finally take over without his anxious software glitching and getting in the way.
That actually brings us seamlessly into Section 4, process. There's a specific quote in this chapter that I highlighted. It says, amateurs focus on the outcome. Professionals focus on the process. We've touched on this conceptually, but Potterat has a really dark, shocking example of what happens when a professional ignores their own process. The story of the accidental discharge.
Yeah, this story definitely made me sit up straight when I read it. We are talking about a highly elite Tier 1 operator here, a Navy SEAL, a guy with literally tens of thousands of hours of rigorous firearms training, and he accidentally shot himself in the leg.
How does an elite SEAL shoot himself? That's like a 3 Michelin star chef accidentally chopping his own finger off while dicing an onion. It shouldn't happen.
It shouldn't. And it happened for one very specific reason. He changed his physical hardware without taking the time to update his software process. He had purchased a brand new, slightly different holster for his sidearm. He looked at it and thought, I'm a world-class expert. I know how guns work. I can easily handle a slightly new holster.
You got arrogant about the process.
Exactly. He hadn't put in the hundreds of dry fire reps required to build the new physical neural pathways. So, in a chaotic moment of rapid movement during a drill, his highly trained body instinctively did what it had always done with the old holster. But because the mechanical release on the new holster was slightly different, bang, the weapon fired into his leg.
That is just terrifying, but it illustrates the core point so effectively. Consistency is absolute king. You do not ever change your foundational process on game day. You don't try out a brand new, untested sales pitch for the very first time in the biggest client meeting of your career.
Exactly. You rigorously test it, you iterate on it in practice, and then when the pressure is on, you blindly trust the process you built. If you randomly change variables without testing them, you are openly inviting disaster. And Potterat points out that this obsessive reliance on process also applies heavily to time management. He calls it the Beyoncé rule.
Right, the Beyoncé rule. The idea that we all have the exact same 24 hours in a day as Beyoncé.
Which, sure, it's a bit of a meme. Obviously, she has a massive staff of assistants and personal chefs that we don't have. But the underlying principle holds true. High performers are absolutely ruthless about guarding their time. They do not just wake up and let the day haphazardly happen to them.
They don't just open their inbox and react to whatever fire is burning loudest.
Exactly. They proactively engineer their days. A tactical tool for this is color coding your calendar. You mark tasks in green, yellow, or red. Green blocks are your high-priority, deep work, revenue-generating tasks. These are the things that actually advance your 6 pillars. Yellow tasks are necessary maintenance, answering basic emails, doing expenses. Red tasks are urgent to someone else, but not actually important to your goals.
And the warning here is that if you look at your weekly calendar and it is entirely bleeding red with no green blocks at all, you are in serious trouble. You are just a reactive pinball bouncing around someone else's machine.
Exactly. You are managing chaos, not performing. Now, another crucial part of managing your process is how you handle feedback, because you can't improve your process if you don't actually know what you're doing wrong. But Potterat gives a huge warning here about who you listen to. In the modern age of Twitter and Instagram comments, literally everyone has an opinion on what you are doing.
And most of those opinions are completely worthless.
Which is why you have to build what he calls a trust map. Potterat argues that you need to rigorously vet your sources of feedback like you would vet someone for a high-level government security clearance. He outlines 4 specific criteria for who is actually allowed to be on your trust map.
Let's go through those because I think people are way too loose with whose criticism they absorb.
First, are they loyal? Meaning, are they fundamentally committed to your long-term success, or do they have their own hidden agenda? Second, are they honest? Will they actually look you in the eye and tell you the ugly, uncomfortable truth when you mess up?
And let's be real, most casual friends fail the honest test immediately. They just want to be supportive and nice, which feels good but doesn't help you improve.
Exactly right. Nice doesn't fix a broken process. Third, are they an expert? Do they actually possess deep, domain-specific knowledge about the field you are working in? And fourth, are they challenging? Will they push you outside your comfort zone to be better?
So loyal, honest, expert, challenging.
Yes. And if a person giving you feedback does not meet all 4 of those strict criteria, Their opinion is mathematically just noise. Delete the social media comment. Ignore the passive-aggressive email. If you let unvetted noise into your head, it creates interference in your software.
Okay, so up to this point, we've built a solid foundation. We have our internal identity, we've chosen the right mindset, we have a rigorous process, but then harsh reality hits. The PowerPoint completely crashes during the pitch. The client starts screaming at you. The metaphorical saber-toothed tiger attacks. The book calls this adversity tolerance, but I really want to get into the raw biology of this section. What is physically happening inside my body when I start to panic?
This is genuinely the most critical part of the entire book for me because it strips away the emotion and looks at the hard science. We have to talk about the HPA axis. That stands for the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis.
Sounds like a very expensive car part.
It's an ancient evolutionary survival system. It is a biological alarm system perfectly designed to save your life roughly 100,000 years ago. Let's say you're a caveman and you suddenly see a massive threat like a bear. Your hypothalamus instantly screams, danger. It pings the pituitary gland, which rapidly signals your adrenal glands to dump a massive, potent cocktail of cortisol and adrenaline directly into your bloodstream.
Right, the classic fight or flight juice.
Exactly. And this chemical juice does two very specific things. First, it immediately shunts blood flow away from your digestive system and sends it straight to your major muscle group so you can literally fight the bear or run for your life. But secondly, and this is the absolute kicker for modern professionals, it forcefully pulls energetic resources away from your prefrontal cortex.
And the prefrontal cortex is the part of the brain that thinks.
Yes. It is the sophisticated hub for logic, complex language, long-term planning, and empathy. Under deep, sudden stress, you literally, physiologically become stupider. Your functional IQ significantly drops.
Oh, wow. This completely explains why, when you get into a heated argument with your spouse, you say things that are completely illogical, and then 5 minutes later you think, why on earth did I say that?
Yes. The smart, logical part of your brain was temporarily knocked offline by the HPA axis. The problem is, we are walking around modern office buildings with an ancient brain designed to fight bears, but we are using it to read stressful emails. When an email from the CEO pops up and it looks scary, your primitive body literally thinks, bear,
Yeah.
and shuts down the exact logic center you need to actually write a good reply.
That is fascinating. So we are fighting biology.
Yeah.
And to vividly illustrate this, Potterat tells this insane story about Bart the bear. You mentioned Red Bull earlier. They ran these performance under pressure, or PUP camps. And they wanted to teach their extreme athletes how to actively manage this massive HPA chemical spike.
And because it's Red Bull, they didn't just show them a PowerPoint presentation about stress. They brought in a live, trained, 1,000-pound Kodiak grizzly bear named Bart.
I still cannot believe this is a real thing that happened.
It's completely wild. They would literally have the athlete stand alone in a clearing, and the handler would command this massive, terrifying bear to full-on charge at the athlete, stopping just a few feet away, roaring.
I would soil myself. I'm just being completely honest with you. My HPA axis would completely short circuit.
Literally everyone would. That is exactly the point. The body's HPA axis goes absolutely nuclear in that moment. Your heart rate explodes to 200. You get intense tunnel vision. You start hyperventilating. But the goal of this extreme training wasn't to teach the athletes how to wrestle a bear. It was to force them to experience that massive physiological spike in a controlled environment and then aggressively use mental tools to manually override it.
They had to figure out how to force the prefrontal cortex to turn back on while a literal monster is staring them in the face.
Exactly.
Okay.
They were inoculating them against the panic response.
Okay, that makes sense for Red Bull athletes. But I don't have a grizzly bear in my backyard to practice with. I just have crushing quarterly deadlines and a mortgage. What are the actual tools we can use? How do I manually override my own nervous system when it hijacks me? Potterat outlines what he calls the Big Four, plus a couple of extra concepts. I want to walk through these in granular detail because I think our listeners need to know exactly how to execute them.
Let's break them down. Tool number 1 is breathing. But it is not just taking a deep sigh. It is specifically the 4-4-4-4 technique.
Is that the same thing as box breathing? I hear that term thrown around a lot.
It is essentially the same protocol, yes. You inhale deeply through your nose for a count of 4 seconds. You hold that breath in your lungs for 4 seconds. You exhale slowly through your mouth for 4 seconds. And then you hold your lungs empty for 4 seconds. And you repeat this precise cycle for a minimum of 4 unbroken minutes.
Why specifically 4 minutes? Why not just do it once or twice and move on?
Because again, this isn't some mystical energy work. It is hard biological mechanics. Deep, slow, rhythmic breathing physically stimulates the vagus nerve. The vagus nerve acts as the emergency brake pedal for your entire autonomic nervous system. When you stimulate it, it sends a powerful physical signal to your pounding heart to slow down. It actively begins clearing the cortisol out of your bloodstream. You are literally hacking your own biology.
You can't think your way out of a panic attack.
Exactly. You cannot use logic when the logic center is offline. You cannot think your way out, but you can physically breathe your way out. SEALs use this exact technique sitting in the back of a vibrating helicopter on the way to a night raid. Elite neurosurgeons, like Dr. Joe Maroon, who was mentioned in the book, use it in the scrub room before they make the very first incision on a patient's brain.
So practically speaking, when the boss is yelling at me in a meeting, I should just sit there and start breathing like Darth Vader.
Kind of maybe do it quietly so you don't look crazy, but fundamentally, yes, control the breath to control the mind.
Got it. Okay, tool number 2 is visualization. But the book uses a very specific acronym, KMI, kinesthetic motor imagery. How is that different from just closing my eyes and picturing myself succeeding?
Most people do visualization entirely wrong. They just passively watch a movie in their head where they win the race and everyone cheers. That is not visualization. That is just daydreaming. KMI requires intensely engaging all 5 of your physical senses in the mental rehearsal.
Give me a concrete example of what KMI looks like in practice.
Let's use the surgeon example again. Days before a complex, dangerous operation, a high-performing surgeon doesn't just happily picture the patient magically healed. They sit in a quiet room, close their eyes, and they physically feel the weight of the steel scalpel in their hand. They vividly imagine the harsh smell of the antiseptic scrub. They hear the rhythmic, high-pitched beep of the heart monitor. They mentally and physically rehearse the exact microscopic hand movements required.
It's a full sensory simulation.
Yes, and critically, they vividly imagine the absolute worst-case complications. They ask, what happens if that major artery unexpectedly bursts right now? And they visualize themselves calmly executing the emergency protocol to fix it. Here is the mind-blowing science behind this. fMRI scans show that the brain actually fires the exact same complex neural pathways during high-fidelity KMI visualization as it does when you are performing the real physical act.
So you are basically tricking your brain into believing you have already done the scary thing.
You are preloading the software with experience. So when you get to the real high-stress event and the artery bursts, your brain doesn't panic. It says, oh, okay, we've already done this exact scenario 100 times in the simulator. I know exactly what to do. It drastically reduces the feeling of novelty. Reduced novelty equals reduced stress, which keeps the HPA axis completely quiet.
Which flows perfectly into tool number 3, contingency planning, or what the book refers to as automaticity.
Yes, this is the ultimate antidote to anticipatory anxiety. Anxiety almost always stems from a fear of the unknown. Our brains hate the unknown. We spiral thinking, what if X happens? What if Y happens? Contingency planning brutally cuts that off by creating a firm rule. If X happens, I will automatically do Y.
The book uses the story of Anthony Oceanuga to highlight this, right? The air race pilot.
It is a terrifying story. Oceanuga is an elite pilot who competes in these insane low-altitude air races. During a competitive flight, he suffered a catastrophic mechanical failure. Hot oil started violently spraying out of the engine, completely covering his windshield and blinding him midair.
That is the ultimate nightmare scenario. You are flying fast, close to the ground, and you suddenly can't see anything.
Total nightmare. Most pilots would instantly freeze in terror and they would crash. But Oceanuga had rigorously used KMI and contingency planning for months. He had mentally visualized that exact, specific disaster scenario. He had a pre-built plan for it.
If oil covers the glass, I do this.
Exactly. So when it actually happened, his prefrontal cortex didn't shut down. His brain simply recognized the pattern and said, oh, we know this scenario, execute emergency plan B. He relied on his instruments, looked out a small side window, and safely landed the plane. It was automaticity.
If you bring that back to the corporate world, if you are walking into a massive pitch meeting, you need to ask yourself beforehand, what if the projector dies? What if the client explicitly hates our very first slide? If you already have a prepared response for those disasters, the fear of them happening vanishes.
Precisely. It quiets the background panic.
Okay, tool number 4, the big 4, segmenting goals.
The old joke is, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. If a Navy SEAL candidate stands on the beach on Sunday evening and looks at the entirety of Hell Week, 5.5 days of continuous physical torture with no sleep, his brain will break. The sheer magnitude of the suffering will cause him to quit immediately.
So how do they survive it?
They ruthlessly segment the timeline. They shrink their cognitive horizon. They don't think about Friday. They tell themselves, I just need to survive until the sun comes up. And then I just need to make it to breakfast. When you are massively overwhelmed by a huge project or a life crisis, do not look at the finish line. Look down at your feet. Take one single step and then focus entirely on the next step.
Just make it to lunch.
I love that.
Now, beyond the big four, there are two other conceptual tools he throws in that I thought were absolutely brilliant for real-time performance. Black boxing and the ABC model of self-talk.
Black boxing is an incredibly crucial skill for managing a mistake that happens while you are actively performing. Let's say you are giving a keynote speech, and 5 minutes in, you totally blank and fumble a major point. If your internal monologue starts dwelling on that mistake, oh my God, I look so stupid, everyone noticed, you're going to be so distracted that you will definitely fumble the next 10 words too.
The mistake compounds.
Exactly. Black boxing is a visualization technique where the second the mistake happens, you mentally picture grabbing that error, shoving it into a heavy steel black box, locking it shut, and setting it on a mental shelf. You acknowledge it exists, but you refuse to deal with it right now. You violently force your focus back to the present moment.
But you do eventually have to unpack the box, right? You can't just ignore your flaws forever.
That is a vital point. Yes, you must unpack the box later. That is how you analyze your process and learn. But you only open that box hours or days later in a safe environment after the adrenaline has completely flushed from your system and your emotions have cooled down. In the heat of the moment, lock it up.
And what about the ABC model for self-talk?
The ABC model is a cognitive behavioral framework to start downward mental spirals. A stands for activating event. B stands for belief. C stands for consequence.
Walk me through an example of how that spirals.
Okay. Activating event. I completely dropped the ball on a client account. Belief. Because I dropped the ball, I am a total failure and a fraud who doesn't deserve this job. Consequence. I feel deeply depressed, I lose all my motivation, and I stop trying for the rest of the week.
I think everyone listening has run that exact painful loop in their head. How does the elite performer alter it?
The elite performer actively hacks the B's phase, the belief phase. They challenge the irrational narrative with hard data.
So it looks like what?
Activating event. I dropped the ball on the client account. Belief. Okay, I made a mistake today, but looking at the historical data, I have successfully managed 99 out of my last 100 accounts. This was a rare fluke, not a definition of my character. I am still a highly competent professional. Consequence. I shake off the disappointment, figure out what went wrong in the process, and aggressively attack the next account.
It's basically real-time cognitive reframing. It intercepts the emotional spiral before it can cause a consequence.
Exactly. It keeps you firmly inside the circle of control.
So we've covered a tremendous amount of intense, high-performance tactical stuff. But Potterat makes a huge pivot in Section 6. He emphasizes strongly that you cannot just run the human engine at redline RPMs forever. You need balance and recovery. And honestly, coming from a guy who trained hardened Navy SEALs, I found this section surprisingly gentle and holistic.
It is gentle, but it's based on harsh realism. He circles all the way back to the house metaphor with the 6 pillars. If you spend your entire life violently redlining the engine to build nothing but the career pillar, your machine is going to permanently break. You will burn out. Elite performance requires deep systemic recovery.
And he makes a very distinct point here, that true recovery is active. It is not just passive numbing.
This is where most people get it wrong on the weekends. Passive recovery is crashing on your couch and mindlessly scrolling TikTok for 3 hours, or binge watching a show you don't even like. That doesn't actually recharge your central nervous system, it just distracts it. It numbs the exhaustion.
Yeah.
Active recovery intentionally restores the system.
Things like getting 8 hours of sleep, eating proper nutrition, hydration.
Yes, the foundational physiological stuff. But active recovery also includes psychological detachment, spending time deep in nature, writing in a gratitude journal, or, and this is my favorite piece of advice in the whole book, intentionally doing something you are genuinely bad at.
Wait, hold on. Doing something I am terrible at is supposed to be recovery. That sounds incredibly frustrating, not relaxing at all.
It sounds counterintuitive, but it is actually profoundly liberating for a high achiever. Because it completely severs your ego's desperate need for perfection. Remember the story of Nathan Chen playing his acoustic guitar in the Olympic Village?
Right.
He wasn't trying to become the next Eric Clapton. He didn't care if he missed a chord. He was just playing for the sake of playing. By engaging in an activity where he had zero pressure to be elite, it allowed his brain to completely disengage from the exhausting must-be-perfect loop that dominated his skating life. It is the definition of play, and play is deeply restorative to the human brain.
So if you are a high-stress lawyer or an executive, you should go take a pottery class or try surfing, knowing full well you are going to be terrible at it. It gives your excellence muscle a much-needed vacation.
That is exactly the prescription. Enjoy the freedom of sucking at something.
I love that. Now, finally, we have to talk about how all of this philosophy applies outward. Because it's one thing to fix our own software,
Yeah.
but how does this apply to the people we lead at work and, more importantly, the kids we are raising at home? The book says Potterat's most frequently asked question from clients is, how do I teach this exact mindset to my children?
And his blunt answer to that question is honestly terrifying for modern parents to hear. He tells them, you have to let them fail.
Ah, yes, the classic snowplow parent problem.
Precisely. We live in this modern cultural era of extreme helicopter parenting or snowplow parenting. We proactively rush ahead of our children and frantically shovel every single minor obstacle out of their path. If they forget their homework on the kitchen counter, we immediately drive it to the school for them so they don't get a zero. If they get a bad grade, we march in and argue with the teacher.
We do it because we love them and we desperately want to protect them from feeling any pain or disappointment.
Of course, the intention is pure love. But Potterat argues from a psychological standpoint that by frantically protecting them from all adversity, we're actually designing them the vital opportunities they need to build their own software.
We're trapping them on Windows 95.
Yeah.
We're preventing the update from installing.
That is a perfect way to phrase it. If a child never repeatedly experiences what psychologists call microfailures, like losing a soccer game, failing a math quiz, or having a messy argument with a friend, they never develop the internal mechanism to self-soothe. They never learn how to analyze a process and pivot. They literally do not build the neurological pathways of resilience.
So what is the result of that?
The disastrous result is that they cruise through childhood in a protected bubble, and then they hit 22 years old. They face their very first real, unavoidable failure in the adult workplace, and they completely structurally shatter because they have zero adversity tolerance built up.
Derek Walker, who is a Nike executive mentioned in this chapter, he has a great phrase for this. He calls it failing forward.
Yes. Walker has 8 kids, so he knows a thing or two about chaos. He fundamentally believes that a parent's actual job is not to magically prevent the fall from happening. The parent's job is to stand back, let the fall happen, and then be right there when they hit the ground to ask the correct framing questions.
Not asking, why are you so clumsy? Or saying,
yeah.
here, let me fix this for you.
No, you ask them. Were you brave today? What specific thing did you learn from that mistake? Were you kind to yourself after you messed up? By actively framing their inevitable failures as valuable learning data, you are helping them install a growth mindset from day one. You are simultaneously letting them build their hardware while teaching them how to code their own software.
That is a very tough pill to swallow when you hate seeing your kids upset. But I think every single parent listening deep down knows it is absolutely the truth.
It is the hardest but most important work of leadership, whether at home or in the boardroom. You have to model the tolerance for failure.
So, trying to bring this massive topic all home, we have unpacked a tremendous amount of material today from Potterat and Eagle. We've looked at the difference between the physical hardware and the mental software. We've talked about stripping away the anxiety of reputation to find the anchor of identity.
We covered the absolute necessity of staying firmly inside the circle of control.
We looked at the sheer, brutal biology of the HPA axis and how the big four, the breathing, the visualization, the contingency planning, can manually override our panic response.
And we wrapped with the importance of the 6 pillars in active recovery to prevent complete system burnout.
It really feels like the overarching, unified message of this entire deep dive is that excellence is never a final destination you just arrive at. It is a continuous, daily habit.
It perfectly connects back to that famous Will Durant quote they use, "We are what we repeatedly do." Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit.
Right. You don't just wake up one magical Tuesday and suddenly become an elite performer. You become elite by making the conscious, difficult choice hundreds of tiny times a day to focus entirely on your process, to take 4 seconds to breathe through the stress spike in traffic, to actively choose your mindset before you walk through the front door of your house.
And the really empowering takeaway for everyone listening is this: you are already a performer. You are already in the arena every single day, whether you are managing a household, studying for finals, or running a company. The only remaining question is, are you finally going to upgrade your software?
That is the ultimate challenge for our listeners this week. You don't have to do it all at once. Just pick one single tool from today. Maybe it's trying the 4-4-4-4 breathing technique the very next time you feel your blood pressure rising in traffic. Maybe it's sitting down tonight and writing out those 10 specific words for your personal credo.
Or maybe it's just looking at your chaotic calendar and starting to color code it so you can take your time back.
Exactly. Just start the upgrade somewhere. Because you really don't need to be a Tier 1 Navy SEAL to learn how to operate like one in your own life. And frankly, I think we could all use a little less panic and a lot more software stability. Thank you all for diving so deep with us today. We will see you next time.
Stay in the circle.